Today's guest used to sit a couple desks in front of me in junior high French class. I always admired her because she was the top student in our school. She was quiet and kind and really lovely to be around. And most importantly, she used to laugh at my corny jokes, one of the few people that did. I also got to watch as she evolved into the biggest Duran Duran fan I have ever met. It was quite a transformation to watch in those years. But that's a story for another day. After 40 years, we recently reconnected. And her profession struck a chord with an area I'm exploring these days, the role of arts in leadership. Stephanie Bolster is a Governor General's award-winning poet, an esteemed professor at Concordia University, and an influential voice in Canadian literature. Our conversation delves into the transformative power of poetry and art in leadership, exploring themes of self-awareness, ethical decision-making, and the creative processes that drive innovation. Whether you are a leader, a creative, or simply someone seeking to understand the deeper connections between art and life, this episode promises to offer some profound insights. Enjoy the conversation. Welcome to the Navigating Disruption podcast. I'm Shakeel Barmal, your host. As the founder of Ocean Blue Strategic, an executive coach at the Ivy Academy, and a partner with the Summit Group, I spend my days exploring the intricacies of leadership, customer relationships, and strategic thinking. Here, we connect with fascinating individuals from various walks of life to discover how we can make a more significant impact in these complex times as leaders, colleagues, and sales professionals, and more importantly, how we can grow as human beings. Before we begin today's episode, I acknowledge that we are recording from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. As I am a stone's throw from the meeting of the Ottawa, Gatineau, and Rideau rivers, it's important to recognize this area's rich history as a gathering place. For hundreds, or probably thousands of years, where these rivers meet has been a site of exchange, of goods, yes, but also ideas and cultures. And they continue to flow through this, our virtual community, shaping our interactions and hopefully our future. Stephanie, how are you today?
I'm good. It's great to be talking to you.
Yeah, and I can't really believe we're actually talking here.
Yeah, it feels strangely kind of normal and also totally bizarre after decades.
Yeah, after decades. I mean, I can't remember the last time I would have actually seen you, but I certainly remember the first time. I don't remember which class, but I know like it was grade 8 and we were, I know I was 13. Would you have been about 13 as well?
I turned 13 in October of grade 8. I remember my birthday. It was not a good day.
It was not a good day. Oh my goodness.
Not a good day. Yeah. But
you have to say more about that, even though that's not usually the start of an episode, but say more about that.
Oh, it was, I don't know. I just had like a miserable cold and, I always brought a lunch to school, but my mom had given me money to buy something at the cafeteria, but I couldn't taste anything. And, I bought my favorite like grape Fanta and it just tasted like nothing. And
okay. Wow, what a memory.
and the school was still, and I think I was wearing like my new, headband thing because that was very, like, it was the kind of the end of the Olivia Newton-John kind of physical era. And I was still figuring out the school, it was high school. Well, I mean, junior high, but it was like, a world apart from my elementary school. So
for sure. I think we all were in that time in the 80s trying to figure out who we were in relation to other people, who we were in relation to ourselves. And that was quite an interesting time figuring out, like what it meant to be a person in a community. And it's hard to fully wrap. I'm sure you've wrapped your mind around all that.
Totally. Yeah. I know everything about, I'm still spending my life. I mean, that's partly why I write. It's like trying to figure out who I am and what I think and what I feel. And I think at that age, it was still, I don't know, just figuring out myself was enough. Never mind trying to negotiate other people.
Yeah.
And all of these new different groups and just so many people and, very few people who I knew. So it was, it's easier to process in retrospect, but at the time it
Yeah.
was kind of overwhelming.
For
Yeah.
sure, for sure. Well, first of all, let me just say, like, what an honor it is to have a recognized Governor General award winning, many other award winning poet
Well,
on
thank
this podcast. I feel like I've arrived now when I have somebody of your caliber on my podcast. So I'm very excited about that
you.
and quite honored that you agreed.
Well, of course. No, I mean, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. It's a new context through which
Yeah,
to think about the kind of
yeah,
things I do. And it's kind of, I feel like my world has, I've been on sabbatical this past year and kind of done a
okay,
few collaborative things where I feel like, I mean, academia is really a bubble and I spend
yeah,
most of my time with other writers. And so just sort of thinking like, what are the implications of poetry in the world? And
yeah,
I mean, there obviously are a lot, but I kind of exist within this little world where we are, just working with students and thinking about publishing and, but there's so much that poetry has to contribute in the larger world that I'm just, having a bit of distance from my
hmm.
to think about those kind of things. So when you asked me, I thought this is perfect. It's like the universe is aligning.
Oh, fantastic.
Thinking, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, let's step back for a moment just to fully catch listeners up. Of course, I've given an introduction about you from my perspective, but you should have the chance to tell us a bit about yourself from your perspective. And the way I usually ask this question is, tell us, I mean, of course, what you do, like maybe just the description or the proper name for how you define yourself. And more importantly, like, how do you now describe your role in the world?
Wow. Well, I mean, I think the foremost thing is that I teach poetry, although I don't actually believe that poetry writing can be taught. But I mean, I
Uh,
facilitate poetry writing classes at Concordia University in Montreal. And I've been doing that for 24 years now, almost.
okay. So let's be clear, you're a professor.
I'm a professor. Yeah, I'm a professor in the English department. The creative writing
Okay.
program is housed within the English department. I mean, obviously, I was a writer first, and that's how I ended up in this position. But
Yeah.
it's interesting because growing up, there was a time when it was kind of a toss up. Do I want to be a teacher? Do I want to be a writer? And then, at one point realizing, oh, maybe I could do both of those things.
Uh,
And as a poet, there's not a lot of sustainable income to be made from writing poetry. So,
right.
Poets are always looking for some kind of, as people would say now, a gig or a side hustle to kind of pay
Yeah.
the bills. And teaching, I was just fortunate enough to get this teaching job
Yeah.
after having won the Governor General's Award, as you mentioned, which I was fortunate enough to win that for my first book. And so it really did open a lot of doors.
Yeah.
And since then, I've really defined myself more by teaching than by writing, just because by
Interesting.
virtue of the nature of the job, that's what I've spent my time doing.
Right. It occupies more of your time and therefore.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And it kind of took me a while to make a peace with that
Hmm.
because there's not a lot of time for writing, and writing is it's the thing that's closest to my heart.
Hmm.
But I really realized that by facilitating other people's work, I mean, I'm still engaging with poetry in a really meaningful way, but also realizing that just the human impact of working with people,
Hmm.
these people that I've had in my life over the past, almost quarter century, young people I would never have met,
Hmm.
contexts, and spending time with them as they reflect on, who they are as they're coming to
Hmm.
find themselves through their writing. So it really transcends, poetry is the vehicle, but
Yeah.
it's really just a means of understanding other people and understanding the world. And that's kind of the bigger picture that I didn't really have the insight into when I started.
Interesting, Stephanie. So as we are talking and as you're sharing this thought, like, I see so much, and I'm going to say this as humbly as I can. I see so much of myself in you, particularly as it relates to a little bit of motive and interest. Look, we had one 15, 20-minute conversation a few weeks ago. We exchanged a few emails when I took the leap to ask if you would do this. But there's one of the things I've picked up, and you sent me a sample of your writing, something you wrote about in the past, and I shared some of my writing with you a little bit sheepishly
Oh, no,
compared to sending my writing to a poet. My goodness, there's nothing. I've never felt more vulnerable in my life.
oh no, no, it's great. It's great. I mean, I love the fact that writing is such a big part of what you do.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Is this idea of using writing to explore your relationship and your understanding of human behavior? I think I backed into that myself. And so, because I'm fascinated by human behavior and our individual's role in the world and how they can be deliberate and face their most difficult parts of themselves and their blind spots and interact with that and writing is a great way to do that. The arts are a great way to do that, which is what attracted me to have this conversation with you. And I've been really interested in the relationship between leadership development, leadership self-awareness, and the arts. And so that's kind of where I wanted to go a little bit with this conversation. But let me step way back now, go back to the 80s, because I mean, I remember you as being very quiet.
Yeah, that's totally accurate. I
Right.
remember myself that way too. Yeah.
And you may not, you seem like a very humble person, but you were, I think I don't think I'm exaggerating. I say you were probably the smartest person in at least our grade, if not the school, because you always got top marks and you were always on top of the honor roll. I remember that. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You're nodding. That's good. That's good that you're
I'm,
validated.
I'm proud of that, but it was also kind of hard to be that person.
Okay, well, I'd love to dive into that a little bit if you're open to it. Because, so here's what I'm recalling. You didn't say much, you didn't talk much, but for some reason, and I can't explain it, I felt a little connected to you. And I still don't know if I can fully explain it, but as you talk about, your interest in poetry, your interest in human behavior, your reflective nature, looking at the past, I think maybe there was a kindred nature in our spirits that maybe we didn't, at least I wasn't mature enough to fully understand there, but kind of the body knew,
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I also felt that connection. I mean, obviously, during the pandemic, kind of looking around online, who do I remember and where are these people and what are they doing? And it was, a handful of people that I looked up, and you had, really stayed in my mind. I think just, your own, intelligence and sense of humor. You were much more kind of, I think it was probably easier to get a read on you because you kind of lived closer to the surface of yourself. When I think about myself now, I feel like I was really submerged. And I mean, it's, one thing to say, oh, I wish I'd been different, but that's who I was, and to some degree still am. But I think there is something about maybe the kind of attention we were paying things, even though, as you say, like neither of us really kind of having the maturity to get that, to understand what that connection was.
Yeah.
And I really kind of defined myself around being a really good student, even though I would say maybe less so through junior high, but through elementary school, it was hard to always be the person with the top marks. There was a lot of teasing. I mean, what you would probably now just say is, bullying, but basically it was hard to, and for some reason, I mean, to me, I felt like being a smart girl was particularly difficult, or maybe that was just in my cohort. Maybe that was also just stuff that, my parents said to me as a way of kind of comforting me that I just internalized, and I don't know, but I did find that was both, it was kind of, my defining feature of who I was, and I was proud of it. I worked, I mean, at first it was easy to get good marks, and then at a certain point, I worked for it, but I also felt like I wish that I could be those people who just seem to be, out there enjoying life and kind of, I mean, it's not like I didn't have friends, but I think I was much more kind of a watcher and observer than certainly in terms of, extracurriculars. It's like, I didn't sign up for anything. I didn't do anything, I didn't do student council. I didn't do sports. I didn't do, but I was aware of the people who were doing those things. And,
you were obviously a keen observer of what was going on around you. But let me just say, it's so interesting you talk about this. I think one thing we've probably learned as we've gotten older, and it probably didn't take very long for you, is that everything is a double-edged sword, right? Our best features are also our worst features. Our things that we're most proud of also are the things that sometimes kind of do us in a little bit.
Yeah, totally. And that's kind of, I mean, I remember writing a poem actually as an undergrad. It was called kind of Watcher Watched. And I felt like, I was always watching other people, but I was also kind of aware of that kind of scrutiny on myself too. Like I had always had a real kind of self-consciousness.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
So that's just kind of one, like that was an early awareness of like, yeah, this, this has two qualities. And the way that I'm observing other people, is it always, open, generous, or is it judging? I mean, I think even then I was kind of thinking about the ways that could go in directions I wasn't proud of, so yeah. And, the desire to be liked, is that about being authentic, or like, where does that come from? Who does one want to be liked by, and why?
Yeah.
What does popularity mean in that context? So it's such complex stuff for
For sure.
to be navigating, really.
I mean, I listen to you now, and I think I wish I had a little bit of what you had at that time, because, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say, but I'm a grown up now. I could say it, is that I probably was worried a bit too much about what people thought of me back then. And I was probably trying too hard to be accepted. And, I probably made jokes to kind of build my own brand. I would have never called it that then, but that's probably it. And so I would say that the whole, hard on my sleeve kind of comment you made, I think I was right, living at the surface. I think that's very true. And I think during my career, at least my early career, I found that at times it didn't serve me so well.
Okay.
And I might have been, I think, judged a little bit by, at that time in the 80s, if you think about the management structure of corporate Canada, very staid, very much a boys' club. And I always felt like a bit of a square peg in a round hole. And it probably wasn't until the last 5 to 10 years that I realized that my approach to life and leadership actually is, what's required. It just took a while to get there.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. I mean, first I will go back to say that, your extroversion and your sense of humor never seemed forced to me. It seemed really natural and joyous, like something really, really positive that I felt like I benefited from kind of being around, and maybe like wanted to be more like that. But, so like, yeah, there was definitely that felt really authentic to me. But I can hear what you're saying about that desire to be liked. And I think how it must be difficult in a kind of, administrative role, managerial role, to reconcile that with the kind of hard decisions that you have to make sometimes. And I mean, I feel that myself in the classroom, just sort of, it's kind of some soul searching I've done, let's say, over like the last decade, around like, what does it mean to be nice? Like, I feel like I grew up defining myself as like a nice person. And that's not always the wisest way, like being I feel like the difference between kind and nice is important, and being attentive is really important. But being nice is kind of the surface of that. And it's about how you're seen, that it doesn't have a lot of depth necessarily, or complexity to it. And also then, sort of being respected. And where do you find that if there's this kind of surface layer of, I want you to like me. It's and then also, as a writer, I actually stopped writing poetry reviews very early in my writing career, because I realized I didn't have the guts to say what I really thought about books by writers that I might later meet. And I thought, I was doing it, to make, it was like $100 for a review or whatever, which at the time wasn't bad, in the mid 90s. And then just thinking, if I can't really say what I think, I don't want to be putting my name behind these words. Then it's not a genuine review. And so I just stopped doing it. I admired people who could get out there and say what they really thought in a way that was, respectful of the book and not like mean spirited. But I couldn't do that. So I just made a choice to kind of pivot in another direction and just focus on my own.
Interesting. Yeah. So I would say my discovery was similar. I think it really happened when I think it was when I became a management consultant coming out of business school. And I realized that, companies were actually paying a lot of fees to my company. Didn't go right into my pocket, but they're paying high fees for us to come in there. And if we weren't 100% honest in a respectful way about the way we saw things based on our analysis, even if it ruffled feathers on the senior management team, I think we felt we were, not earning our money. And that was almost an ethical violation of it by holding back the truth. What
Yeah.
I did learn over time, Stephanie, is I worked very hard at how do you deliver the truth, even if the truth hurts, in a way that makes it hurt a little bit less and therefore more likely to be accepted and actioned. And that's something I invested a lot of energy and time doing, is making sure the truth is told, but done in a respectful, and you use the word kind way.
And that's huge. Yeah, that's hugely, I mean, we probably don't have time to go into all the details of how you do that, but I mean, that's probably, a whole other, seminar I'm sure you can get. But I mean, that fascinates me because how do you prepare receptivity, in the people that you're speaking to? And I find that as a teacher too, I find, I'm constantly kind of juggling how much, and it's not like it's an either or, but when is my role to support and just get the students to be writing their work and really not judging it. They just need to get it out there and be encouraged and praised. And then when do I need to be a little tougher? And I find that I actually tend to be tougher on the writers who are better, who are already more accomplished, because I feel like they can handle it. And if I'm telling them, you know what, you do this really well, but I've seen you do this before. Like, I know that you can write this kind of poem.
Yeah,
how about trying to break that open and do something else? And I have to know them well enough to know if, it's reading the work, but also reading the person.
Yeah, for sure.
Are they ready to handle that? And for me also to make clear, like, where that's coming from, and the fact that, like, it's because I hold their work in such high esteem and I think they're already doing so well that I'm encouraging them to push themselves. Whereas somebody who's really new to poetry and is really kind of vulnerable and just testing it out, I'm not going to be that tough with that person, because it's just going to turn them off writing poetry entirely. So it's all about kind of calibrating that interpersonality and figuring out when you can deliver what kind of comments.
Oh my goodness. You've just decoded what I think is one of the secrets of really positive, giving, generous leadership in what you've just described there. The parallels are very similar. Oftentimes when you have a high performer in a work setting, you will kind of just let them do their thing. And because they're doing so good, you don't want to rock the boat. You want to disturb it. Maybe you even don't want to hurt their ego because they're so good. But in reality, you're doing them a disservice because you're not supporting the potential for being even greater than they are.
Well, and especially in this case, I mean, if your firm is like, you're hired to come in and do that, right? To have that perspective. They just, I mean, as nice as it would be to be told, "Oh, you guys are great. There's nothing I would change." That's not what they're paying for, and they probably already sense, that there are ways that they can grow, but they don't have the distance, the perspective to see that. And it's the same thing. With students in a class, it's like they want to learn something. Even though it might be hard for them to learn it in that moment, and it might take them like 5 years before they kind of process.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think it is interesting how similar those aspects are.
Yeah. So, I mean, the takeaway for me from what you've said, what I'm thinking is that when you have the high performance, you have a bit of high performers on your team, you owe them the responsibility of being honest, candid, pushing them a little further in areas that they can get better at so they can be the best they can be to serve the rest of the organization, their team, their community in a stronger way. But I loved what you said about those people that might not be quite there yet. Maybe they're a little bit more vulnerable. They're just getting their feet under them. And so you want to be honest with them, but you want to do it in a much gentler way. And you want to pick your moments, I think.
Exactly. And I mean, I have the luxury of working with these students for a whole year, usually, September to April. So you can get to know people, they can get to know each other. They may be hearing things from their peers in the workshop that then I can kind of underscore, or I can counter those things. So it's a whole ecosystem of relationships. And, I can wait until, there's some things that I'll kind of, put in my final comments to the student after the very last portfolio of work, like this is what you might want to think about for the future. And sometimes I get to work with the same writers again, the next year. I mean, I have students that I've actually worked with as undergrads, and then they come back and do their masters, and then sometimes even do a PhD. So sometimes it's like a really long period of time I get to work with somebody. Whereas, in your case, you're going in, you probably have very limited, maybe like a week, a few days.
Well, no, I mean, what you're describing is when I used to be a management consultant, but now, as you lead organizations, you're there for quite a time. You have people you're leading. In the case of, I don't know if this is relevant for you, but when you're leading a team of people, sometimes you have to actually counsel people to come to a conclusion that this is not the right fit for them. Either you have to let them go, or you have to lead them to a place where they make that determination for themselves and move on. But it sounds very similar to those kinds of dynamics over getting to know people over time.
I think so. Although, I mean, I think what you're contending with is harder because people's livelihood is attached to that, and a really big part of their sense of self. I mean, I think working with, specifically, I was just talking about kind of, undergraduate writers, some of them, they don't even know that the role that they want writing to take in their lives. So there's more flexibility. It's probably easier for people to, and they're also still finding themselves, so they're maybe open to realizing, okay, maybe this isn't what I thought it was, or this isn't what I want to do. Or also other cases where people thought that they, were a fiction writer, or they were just taking this class as an elective, and then they realize actually poetry is like not at all what I thought it was. This is something I can actually do, and they get really excited about it. So there's an opportunity to kind of win people over as well.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you used the words, and it kind of triggered me in a positive way, finding yourself. And this is one of the hypotheses I had in wanting to have this conversation with you, that my own discovery and, marinating in the arts for myself is that the arts, whether it be music or poetry or writing, can be a mechanism for helping you build self-awareness, thinking through things, reflecting, finding yourself, and something that leaders really do need. And so I was very curious on your thoughts around that as poetry or writing as a vehicle for self-awareness. What are your thoughts?
I think I think of all of the literary genres, in my program, we kind of divided into like playwriting, fiction writing, and poetry. I think poetry scares a lot of people because of the kind of self-exposure they feel is required, which is not necessarily the case. But I mean, I think to write good poetry, you don't have to be revealing yourself overtly. I think you have to be paying attention to the world, which is actually hard to do, to just like let everything in. And I think the kind of qualities that make a good poet is kind of having a very permeable membrane. I think that makes it really hard to be in the world sometimes, right? You're feeling the global crises that are going on. You're feeling like your own life and the things you're contending with. Poets tend not to go through life on autopilot, like they're kind of feeling and, taking all these things in. But I mean, those things, as you said before, it's kind of, there's a hard side of that. And then there's the gift of that, which is like, you're seeing things, you really are living your life, you're paying attention. And then you're making something of it. Like you're making art of it. You're transforming it into something that you can come to understand yourself through the act of writing, but you can also potentially help other people understand themselves as they read your work. And, you're giving something, you're communicating. I would say my writing is foremost communication with myself, and then secondarily communication with other people. I mean, some people put that in the other order, and maybe we're kind of told to think of it as like you're writing for the reader. But for me, it's like, no, I'm actually more selfish in that I'm writing for myself. And then if I can make something that I feel proud of, that I want to share with other people, then they may find something in that too. So I think it's a form of, it's different from journaling, because you do have that sense of giving something to the world and really choosing the best word, not just the first word, but you do still have to have that kind of open conduit with yourself in order to get there in the first place. And I think a lot of young people that's what they're thinking about, so they're kind of receptive to writing poetry, because they are very actively trying to figure out who they are and what they can contribute to the world. And I feel as though social media has created a lot of alienation, but also created a lot of introspection. People are thinking about like, who am I? How do I fit into the world? How do I present myself? And so poetry is a way of contending with that, but that goes hopefully, deeper than, posting selfies on Instagram. But I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
but it's part of, self-expression and self-knowledge in that way.
Gosh, Stephanie, there's so much there. Like, I don't even know which direction to go, but I'm just going to start talking on some things that you sparked for me. Is first of all, this idea, this concept that if you have the tendency or the inclination for reflection and observation in the world, that is both a strength of yours, but you called it this permeable membrane. You're taking all this information in, and depending how you process that, for some, it could be they could be used as a spark for creativity and innovation. And I would think that some innovators, new product designers, probably use that in that way, observing behaviors to create product or create ideas. But for others, it can actually be painful to pick up on these emotions, to pick up on what's happening in the world. And in some ways, poetry can be a mechanism to process that for yourself, but also, if shared with others, can also help others that might be going through similar things, maybe. Yeah.
I think so. I mean, people who don't generally read poetry or who never would define themselves as writers of poetry. I mean, they reach for poems, at weddings and funerals are kind of, the classic occasions, right? Like
Yeah.
it's joyful and you want to celebrate and you feel like it calls for some kind of expression that transcends just everyday language. There are anthologies of, poems for weddings. And then likewise, when someone passes away, I mean, a couple of people close to me have lost people close to them recently, and they've, written poems for the occasions of, these memorial services, because as writers, they are expected by their family to do this. Like, this is what you'll be able to share is a poem. And in both cases, I think it's been these particular friends of mine, it's been hard for them to write this work, but also really gratifying, I think, in terms of kind of, coming to terms with the loss and what they are feeling, but also being able to give something to their family that maybe they feel only they can give. And so I think that, and people who, I mean, in this case, I'm talking about people who are writers, but I mean, I think, I've certainly heard just kind of anecdotally, people who aren't writers, but they still, they lose someone and they write a poem about it. And maybe they don't share it with anybody, or maybe they don't think of it as a poem even, but it's just a means of expressing big emotions. And I think that it's something that people seek out.
Can you tell me when did you know that? I mean, you obviously had the interest, had the natural talent, and then you took that and turned that into something, turned that into a profession. How did that evolve for you?
Oh, I mean, I would say I was always writing, even in elementary school. It's funny because after I won the Governor General's Award, somebody that I had known in elementary school kind of tracked me down and sent me an email and said, "I'm so happy for you, and I'm not surprised because you were always such a good writer." And I thought, really, this is like somebody I knew from like grade 2. Like I had no awareness of having been like seen as a good writer in school at that age,
Okay.
But at home, certainly I was always like making little books. My brother would draw the pictures and I would write stories. And, so it was always just a means of expression for me. I wanted to write, well, YA books, basically. I wanted to be like the next Judy Blume. I wanted to write books for 12-year-olds. And then even when I started studying creative writing at university, which that was kind of hard for me to honor that part of myself, because I wanted to do something that felt more practical. Like I thought studying English literature even somehow seemed more practical, or studying psychology. Ultimately, actually, I mean, writing is more practical than studying English literature, right? Because, you're making something, you're not just reading something. But I was, very concerned about making a living. But I had just told myself, if I follow my heart, just like the 80s, my mom was reading a lot of Joseph Campbell books, wrote a lot about mythology, and his phrase was always follow your bliss. And so if I follow my bliss and it doesn't work out, I can come back and do something more practical, but I'll always regret it if I don't try it, So I was trying, following this writing path, because it was always something I felt that it brought me self-understanding, but I also felt like I was good at it, but also it wasn't something that I was good at in a kind of school way, like getting an A+ on your chemistry exam or whatever. I would study for those science classes and do well, but it wasn't where my passion was. I knew
Right.
that writing was what I really wanted to do. And then poetry kind of emerged from that just over time, really realizing that, I had a lot of struggles in writing stories with, plot, character, the kind of major building
Right.
blocks. People would say like, this is beautifully written, but you really need to work on the tension between these characters, or, the plot's kind of meandering, and I realized, okay, I think poetry is like my thing,
Okay.
So it was a combination of feeling more at home in the genre, and then also, yeah, listening to the kind of criticism I was getting and realizing maybe I don't have what it takes to be really good at fiction, but I think I can develop, the skills that I do have in poetry, while being fully aware that it was like the least, like the most marginalized of the genres, like the least
Hmm.
way to make me any kind of living. But that's
Right.
also, in retrospect, there's a real freedom in that, because
Right. Right.
you're not thinking about the market at all,
Yeah.
right? It's like, what do you want to write?
Yeah.
And then just hope that somebody wants to publish it. So it's
Yeah.
actually incredibly freeing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. Well, I'm going to ask you to share some thought. Maybe think of my listeners as perhaps creative writing students. I know you said it's really not something you teach, you bring it out in people. But one of the things I'm thinking about, and I might be making this up completely, from my experience, there's a lot of talk about journaling as a mechanism for self-awareness and developing yourself as a leader, on solidifying the things you learned in a particular day and setting intention to the future. I've tried it. I'm an advocate of it, but it's been a struggle for me just to journal and reflect using journaling. And so I realized that the way I do that is I just write posts on LinkedIn that, as you said, are for me, and maybe they have a little bit of poetry or imagery that help me kind of feel like I'm expressing myself. And then I put it out there, and I use the excuse that is, I'm doing it to serve others. But I think the reality is I'm doing it to serve my own needs, and serving others gives me a good excuse for doing it. I'm going to wrestle around with that myself. But now let's say there are other leaders out there that would need to benefit from daily reflection or thinking or self-awareness building, but journaling's also not their thing, and maybe meditation is also not their thing.
Yeah.
Are there 2 or 3 things you could suggest that maybe they can use to explore, that maybe creative writing or poetry might be something for them?
I mean, I think, the thing that a lot of people maybe resist in journaling is that it's, yeah, very much about kind of the self and focused on the self, which can feel really self-indulgent and kind of
Hmm.
funky, right? Especially
Yeah.
if you're in a field where you're defining yourself on doing things, it can feel like a waste of time to just be kind of mired in your own thoughts, So I think if you can kind of maybe bypass that. I mean, there are so many writing prompts that one can find online for, anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like listen to a song and write something while you're listening to the song,
Mm.
or like just I work a lot with visual arts, or just like work in other media. You just like look at a postcard, you look at a photograph and just write something about it. So I think you kind of trick yourself into getting to some kind of self-expression, because there's something outside of yourself that's the starting point. And so you're ostensibly responding to this image or this piece of music or this sculpture or whatever it is, in whatever way comes to you. Like, don't think about it too much. Just start writing.
Mm.
And then you will usually kind of come to, I mean, I think also don't necessarily think about like the quality of what you're doing. Just kind of
Yeah.
try to get out of your own way and write as quick. I mean, I just call it free writing, write as quickly as you can. Don't think about grammar. Don't think about any of those things, and just like get something out there. And I think that idea of the external prompt can be really helpful, because it doesn't kind of, bypasses that kind of self-consciousness.
Yeah.
I think also there's one kind of sort of basic writing tool that I remember bringing to a group of students at one point, and a lot of them were already familiar with it, because it's used to kind of calm down anxiety. And that's
Mm.
basically it's kind of sensory, like paying attention to the world around you, just like take a moment, think about like 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you
Yeah.
can smell, 1 thing you can taste. And it's the same thing whether you're trying to, prevent a panic attack, or like write a poem or write something in the moment. Is just like you're on the one hand, you're kind of shutting out the kind of chaos of stimulus, by paying attention to it in a way, because instead of becoming something overwhelming, it's like, let me itemize these 5 things and let me actually pay attention to where I am. And like, you think like, no, I can't taste anything. It's like, of course you probably can taste something, or you can smell something. You're just not aware of it, and just kind of
Mhm.
using those tools of, and that goes back to like when I remember writing haiku poetry in like grade 2 as an exercise. And yeah, it's the same thing, like pay attention to your, the 5 senses. It's whether you're, a 50-year-old or like a 5-year-old, it's the same thing about just kind of paying attention to the stimulus. And so that can be another way to kind of get into writing something.
I love it. And you've given us so many different options. So listen to a piece of music, some kind of visual stimuli, as simple as a postcard or a piece of art or something, or just engage your senses and think about flavors, smells, things that you can touch, and just free write.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, try and, and describing flavors and smells too. It's like, it's not easy, right? Like
Yeah,
we come up against the limitations of our vocabulary really
yeah,
quickly. So maybe you don't have the right word to describe it. So then you start thinking metaphorically, right? Like
yeah,
what is this like, and so much of poetry is about like things being like other things. And it just kind of opens up your imagination, which I think, we all have imaginations, but we don't all use them a lot of the time,
yeah,
or kind of, yeah, honor them, and just like play, I think
yeah,
give yourself permission to just play and
yeah.
experiment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fascinating, interesting. That's very helpful. Thank you. At the end of every episode, I do a little bit of a summary, 3 or 4 things I took away. So you've given a lot for me there to noodle on and encapsulate at the end of the episode. But if you can, I want to move in a similar but still a slightly different direction here.
Oh, yeah.
Here's one of the things I've been thinking about that leaders might be facing right now. There's so much pain and challenge happening in the world right now.
Yeah.
It's just hard to list them all, but conflict in parts of the world, climate, mental health, so many things that we're being faced with all at once right now that it can be overwhelming for everybody. But I'm thinking about leaders right now that are leading teams, trying to be resilient, facing the facts, but also being hopeful and optimistic and inspiring their people. And I'm thinking about there's some leaders just based on their individual characteristics that will choose as a coping mechanism to almost shut down and ignore the pain they see around them so they can power through and just focus on driving outcomes and results.
Yeah.
And then I'm painting it simplistically. There's another extreme, I would say, of leaders that feel everything and feel their people's pain and see what's happening in the world and bring that kind of feeling into their leadership. And sometimes it can also be overwhelming, and they get home at the end of the day and are spent and are exhausted. So I think of the two extremes, the kind of overfeeling and the folks that aren't feeling enough.
Yeah.
And both extremes are not great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is there a way to think about, or maybe the way you think about perhaps poetry and writing as a way to somehow balance both extremes, or for those people that might be on the edges of either extreme, have a way to kind of process what's going on? Any thoughts?
Yeah. I haven't really thought about it that way, but I think it makes a lot of sense in that, when you're writing poetry, you're opening yourself up, you're expressing yourself, but you're also exerting some kind of control, right? Like you decide when the poem is done or done enough. You decide what you want to share, you decide which words you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
So, your first draft might feel like something like totally chaotic. That's certainly what my first drafts are like. And then I kind of come in there and I start shaping it. And that ability to, you're still trying to communicate the emotions, but you're taking a little bit of distance from the immediacy of that. And you're thinking about, okay, what do I have to work with here? These are the words that I have. Which ones are working, which ones aren't? And just being really kind of with the piece of writing, real kind of joy that can come from shaping that I always forget, because it's not easy, like rewriting. We always say like 90% of writing is rewriting. It's comparatively easy to come up with something, but then like, how do you make it good? How do you make it better?
Yeah.
But that's also where, for me, a lot of the best moments come from, is when you take something that seems like kind of a bunch of sludge, you know,
Yeah.
and you find these glistening gems in it. And it's like, who wrote that? I
Yeah.
wrote that, you know, and
Yeah.
you start like highlighting the stuff that feels alive and kind of clearing out the rest. And so I think that maybe, and this is just kind of, you know, a first thought towards that, but maybe
Yeah.
that where you can bridge that is whether you're kind of the overfeeling or the not feeling enough, you know, you've opened yourself up, you've expressed something, but now this is yours to shape.
Mm-hmm.
You have the ability to do it. You know, it's just like one choice after another. Like
Mm-hmm.
which word do I like better? Or I know that this isn't good. What else can be
Mm-hmm.
stronger? And just sort of having the kind of humility before your own work and kind of finding what's the best of it. I mean, it's never going to feel perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, you're exerting control. You're realizing that you probably know more than you think you do about what
Mm-hmm.
makes a good piece of writing.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you have that opportunity to share that with somebody and get some response to that, then like that's, you know, the next stage of the gift is like you've shaped something
Yeah.
and somebody's going to be responding to it. So I think that yeah, maybe that's the way of bridging it
Yeah.
through the
Yeah.
act of not just creating, but like exerting creative control over
Yeah.
what you
Yeah.
do.
I love that. I love that. And there's something you said that twigged for me was that you know more than you think you know. And I'm thinking of those folks that don't bring enough feeling into their leadership or are seen not to bring enough feeling into leadership. They probably feel more than they realize they feel. And the act with wrestling around with words and picking the right words and thinking those things actually might help them find a little bit of more of that feeling and perhaps a little bit bring more of that humanity to their leadership.
I think so, kind of like not against their will, but like in spite
Yeah.
of their awareness, you know,
Yeah.
again, like kind of getting out of your own way, kind of tricking yourself into doing things a little differently.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that I have a friend who does workshops with doctors, and
Yeah.
you know, they just have to get through the day. Like the work that they
Yeah.
need to do, they're dealing with human beings, but they can't be feeling all the time,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But she gets them to open up and do this writing, you know, and it's like they have so much to express,
Yeah.
but also they can't be in there all the time, like they can't be feeling all the time, whereas you know my friend she's feeling all the time, you know. And so it's sort of we each bring, you know, what we have and who we are, and
Yeah.
and then just kind of find like poetry can be a place where so many different kinds of people can meet. And that's something
Yeah.
that I really find from teaching is thinking that okay, all these people, what they have in common is that they're here for a poetry class, but they're not all like the same kind of person.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they're there for maybe different purposes. They've had different paths to get there. They're going to go different places afterwards, but at this one time, they're all intersecting with the act of writing. Whether that's like, you know, a one-term class in university, or whether that's like a, you know, 1 hour workshop in the midst of, you
Yeah.
know, like a leadership seminar or something.
Yeah. Wow. So my parallel to that is a few months ago, maybe last fall, I dipped my toe into the world of improv.
Oh wow.
And so I'm now on my about to take my fourth course, and we have a show actually coming up in a couple of days, our term end class show.
Oh, that's
And
great. I
it's been really amazing. And what I thought was just an effort to kind of get out, meet some people, do something social at a time when the kids are kind of all left and gone to school has turned into something quite interesting. And you articulated it as you're meeting people from all different places in life, from
Yeah.
all different ages, and we're all there kind of exploring our own self-expression. And it's really quite remarkable way of discovering it with another group of people.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, it's like it's I think that's amazing that you're doing that. And also to me not surprising. Like I can totally see you doing that. I would be terrified to do that, which is probably exactly why I should be doing that, you know? Like that really public self, and also not having the time to reflect, right? Like you
Yeah.
just have to just like go right in there
Yeah.
and do something, which
Yeah.
is not at all how I work, right? So which is why
Yeah.
it would be great for me, but that's yeah, I can totally see how that's another means of coming at that that same center. And yeah, all these people, for whatever reason, like this is the thing that they chose to spend their time with.
Well, wouldn't it be cool if one day you came from Montreal to Ottawa and I would take you to one of these classes? They have these drop-in ones. I would take you and we'd actually get to be in a classroom again for the first time in 40 years.
Oh my God, could I handle it? It sounds like it has to happen.
Absolutely.
It's only an hour and a half. I could do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to, I can't believe we've been together for almost 50 minutes now, and probably time to bring the conversation, but not the ongoing relationship, to a close. Let me ask you, I have a couple of lightning round questions, if I can ask your permission to put them your way.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously I can see your office background, lots of books, and it seems like you're a curator to me. Is there a knickknack or object that's remained a constant in your office over the years?
Maybe can I slightly expand the range of the house that I would take here? I've always thought, those questions of like, if there were a fire, what would you take from the house? I have this Dutch tile from the 1600s that I bought in Delft in the Netherlands that I have in the kitchen. And just the fact that this has existed, it's probably like, the oldest thing that I own, and it's not from my family, but just the fact that this was like in somebody's kitchen, it's like hundreds of years old, and it was something that was affordable that I was able to buy. And it's like, I've had it in, a few different places I've lived now. So that's very meaningful to me.
Oh, I love that. I love that. A little bit of world history from just a regular person's kitchen in the 1600s. Yeah, amazing. Yeah. That's a good one. Okay, so the next question is, you did make some reference to visual art. Is there a particular visual artist or art movement in particular that does inspire you?
Well, I have, and this is kind of, dovetailing with what I just said, writing a lot of poems earlier in my writing career about Vermeer, who was, Dutch painter of that era. Mm. And very few of his works, he didn't paint very many works. He didn't live for very long. And so the fact that there are just so few works that exist, but also they're very much like poems, his paintings, there's this sense of a suggestion of some kind of mystery or potentially a narrative, but we never know what the context is. A lot of sense of domestic scenes where you're just like, there's a couple of people in a room, somebody's looking out a window, like, what are they thinking?
I love it.
Like there's a real openness that for me as a writer just kind of invited me to kind of project myself into that, and just this real sense of contemplation, and also just the craft. Just like it just brings tears to your eyes, just how exquisitely painted these paintings are. I've stood in front of museums and like you get right up in front of it and you still can't figure out where the brushstrokes are. Like how did he do this?
Yeah.
Marveling at the craft. So even though I also like a lot of contemporary, installation work and work that's kind of totally breaking down that notion of like what is a well-made painting, I also still have that soft spot for like classically recognized beautiful art.
Oh, wonderful. Excellent. Thank you. And then this is, I think I may know the answer based on our conversation, but anyway, let's put it out there. If you could only choose one thing to do for the rest of your life, it could only be one of these two things, writing or teaching, what would it be?
Oh.
Let's assume money was not an issue.
Yeah. I guess probably actually writing, but they would have to, but you said only one thing. This is a tough question, Shakeel. I don't know if I can, because I feel like ultimately I would end up doing both somehow anyway. But I kind of feel like I owe it to myself to honor my writing self for like the next part of my life. If I had that choice, because I have given a lot of time to teaching, and I feel like there's a lot of work that I still have to do as a writer that I don't have time for right now.
Yeah. Well, the good news is you don't have to make the choice. That was completely artificial, and you don't have to do
exactly. And and it would, as you say, but then maybe maybe I'll win a lottery and I will make the choice. So who knows?
Okay, so let me give you an opportunity to my listeners. They want to get to know you a little better. They want to read some of your writing. Where would be the best place for them to go to get exposed to some of your work?
Probably just Google me online and look up my books. I always want to send people into independent bookstores, but there are fewer and fewer independent bookstores around.
Yeah.
My first book is called Whitestone, the Alice Poems. Yeah. Poems about, about and around Alice in Wonderland. So I think it's sort of a place where people who might not read poetry might still find something to connect with. So
Yeah.
it's probably like the easiest to kind of pick up from outside, and
Yeah.
has probably more of a sense of humor than my other books too. So
That's it. So that's the one I picked up when I wanted to get to know you a little bit better. Other than the writing, you sent me your reflective piece on history. I picked up that book, and I have to say, everything you just said is absolutely true. And I particularly like the extrapolation of a scene with Alice in Wonderland and Elvis. Quite enjoyable. I love it.
that was very fun. That was
Yeah,
very fun, and it's like the fact that what inspired it was just, well, two things: the fact that Alice and Elvis just, there's like a similar little sound there,
yeah,
something like a poet would notice, but then also just they're both like these iconic figures who were, actually real people, and we don't spend a lot of time thinking about the real people, but we all have an image of, the iconic figure, right? So that was kind of
yeah.
my exercise for myself, was like, who would I imagine these people having been, and like what would they have to say to each other?
Yeah, I love it. I just thought of another completely unrelated kind of sound similar thing. I don't know if there was a movie and then a TV show about Alice, waitress or server named Alice.
Oh
You ever
yeah.
remember that?
Oh
Right?
yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah.
just imagine there was a part of the movie, or maybe it was the name of the movie that started it all, that says Alice doesn't live here anymore.
I think that was the movie. I've
Yeah,
forgotten the filmmaker now, but it was like a pretty, like, slice of life, gritty realism, like kind
yeah,
of bleak but funny movie. And then the sitcom, like, it's almost, because I saw the sitcom first and then I saw the film
yeah.
afterwards, and I was like, oh my God, like, how did one give rise to the other?
It's
So
true.
they were both great, but in
Yeah.
totally different ways. You're right.
Totally.
And I didn't, that was like, maybe if I ever come back and write more Alice poems, I need to honor that Alice, because that's an Alice who I
Yeah.
met. Yeah.
Yeah. Alice doesn't live here anymore.
Yeah.
And the old phrase that Elvis has left the building. So those
Yeah.
two, I mean, are very familiar.
Okay. I'm writing that down. The B-sides collection will
I
come.
love it.
Yeah. And
All
I'll
right.
acknowledge you for the inspiration. Thank
Oh, thank you. So, Stephanie, this has been a joy, and I can't
you.
believe we're living 2 hours away from each other after all of these years. There is some poetry there, I think,
Oh
in the
yeah.
fact that we've come together for this conversation.
Exactly. No, I'm really grateful, really happy for this conversation, and for like reconnecting this friendship, and kind of like finding the layers in it that we were like too young to see at the time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's,
Well, I mentioned to you I had an episode with Riaz, one of our also friends from
yes,
those
yes,
years. So wouldn't it be nice if we could kind of get together and
we
have
have
a
to do that.
coffee or a meal together? That would be quite a lovely experience.
I would love to do that. I would love to
Yeah.
do that. Even actually, yeah, like my brother was like, so who is this from high school you're talking to? And I mean, he didn't go to Edmonds at the same time that we were there, but he remembered both of your names. So,
Oh, wow. Fascinating.
well,
Love it.
it's like,
That's
yeah, yeah. So you had an existence in my family's imagination too. So
amazing.
we have to make that gathering happen.
For sure. I think so. Thin red lines that connect us, right? Okay. Awesome. Stephanie, have a fantastic day.
You too.
And till next time.
You. That's right.
Take
Take
care.
care.
Yeah,
Bye.
you too. Bye. Wasn't that a great conversation? As we wrap up this enlightening episode with Stephanie, here are 3 key takeaways that really resonated with me. The first was art as a mirror for leadership. Stephanie emphasized how engaging with poetry and the arts can enhance a leader's emotional intelligence, creativity, and their communication skills. By reflecting on human emotions and interpersonal dynamics through poetry, leaders can develop a deeper understanding of themselves and develop the empathy, which are essential qualities for effective leadership. The second takeaway was around ethical dimensions and integrity. Stephanie's work often deals with ethical considerations of witnessing and documenting tragedy. She drew parallels between the ethical challenges in her poetry and those faced by leaders, particularly in today's difficult times. Leaders can learn from the arts about handling complex, sensitive situations with integrity and processing emotions so that they're better able to deal with them in real life, ensuring that their decisions are not only effective, but ethically sound. Third, it was all around creative processes and innovation for me. The creative process in poetry, such as generating ideas, making connections, and expressing complex thoughts, can be directly applicable to leadership practice. Stephanie highlighted the importance of critique and revision, not only in writing, but also in strategic leadership and decision-making. So this iterative process encourages leaders to balance tradition with innovation, fostering agility and resilience. Stephanie, thank you for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. I hope this conversation inspired all of you to explore the intersection of art and leadership in your own lives, in your own way. Have a fantastic day. Thank you for listening. Whether you're a regular listener or joining us for the first time, I want you to know how much I value your support. Your engagement with our content is what keeps us going. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the episode. It truly helps us reach more listeners like you. To learn more about my work, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Visit oceanbluestrategic.com, summitvalue.com, or the coaching page at the Ivy Academy. Thanks to Lindsay Curtis, who helps me edit and produce this podcast, and an exceptional thanks to my favorite indie band, Late Night Conversations, for providing me the music for this podcast. Discover more about them on Instagram at LNC Connected and enjoy more of their music as we close out today's episode.
I'm not where I want to be.